On April 2, 2026, in the ink-black waters of the Strait of Hormuz, the most critical maritime choke point on Earth, a carefully laid trap was about to spring shut on the United States Navy. The USS Paul Ignatius, an Arleigh Burke-class Flight 3 destroyer, was leading a 5-ship tanker convoy through the 21 nautical-mile-wide neck of the strait, the first American escorted passage since President Trump's executive order mandating the free flow of energy to the world's markets. Over 1/5 of the planet's daily oil supply moves through this corridor. Iran had sealed it. The US had come to force it back open, and Iran had spent 34 days preparing exactly for this moment. On the surface, the operation looked routine. The Paul Ignatius was running at 18 knots, its SPY-6 phased array radar spinning at full power, the AN/SLQ-32V6 SEWIP Block 3 electronic warfare suite actively scanning every frequency band. The 5 tankers, 4 very large crude carriers and 1 LNG tanker, were strung out in a 3-kilometer column behind it. Nothing on the radar screens, no AIS anomalies, no acoustic contacts on the hull-mounted SQS-53C sonar. Satellite imagery from the KH-12 constellation overhead showed the nearest IRGC coastal battery was dark. The Hormuz Passage, for the first time in 72 hours, appeared clear. It was a perfect illusion, because Iran had spent 3 years rehearsing exactly this deception. What the Paul Ignatius could not see was what was waiting beneath the thermocline 40 meters down, an IRGC Ghadir-class midget submarine, a 120-ton hunter-killer carrying 2 wake-homing torpedoes. Running on a closed-cycle diesel AIP propulsion system at just 3 knots, its acoustic signature was buried completely beneath the ambient noise of the tanker column's churning screws. It had been sitting in ambush position for 18 hours, waiting. What the convoy did not know was that this ambush had 3 layers, and the clock had just started. At 03:51 hours, the AN/BQQ-10 sonar operator aboard the Paul Ignatius registered an anomaly, a faint, repeating chirp signal at 1.7 kilohertz, a frequency associated with Iranian torpedo guidance wire testing. The contact was fleeting, gone in 4 seconds. The operator flagged it. The Combat Information Center officer ordered the ship to reduce speed to 14 knots and begin a passive sonar sweep. It was the correct tactical decision. It came 4 minutes too late. At 03:52 hours, the sky above the convoy was split open by an eruption of sound. From concealed launch positions along the Iranian coast, 14 kilometers to the north, the IRGC activated a simultaneous salvo from 40 Shahed 238 jet propulsion suicide drones, the upgraded variant Mach 0.8 capable, with a radar-absorbing composite skin and a 50-kilogram shaped charge warhead. They came in at wave-top height, 4 meters above the surface, hugging the sea to stay beneath the Paul Ignatius's radar horizon. The fire control computer of the destroyer's AN/SPY-6 did not detect the first inbound until the range was 6 kilometers. Reaction time, 22 seconds. The general quarters alarm detonated through the ship. Every station went to maximum combat readiness. The Mark 45 5-inch guns swiveled to the threat axis. The 2 Phalanx CIWS Block 1B systems spun their barrels to 4,500 rounds per minute. The VLS cells for the RIM-16-2 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles popped open. What followed was a duel between the most advanced naval point defense system on Earth and 40 incoming warheads arriving from 3 different compass headings simultaneously. The CIWS systems opened fire, creating 2 continuous walls of 20 mm tungsten at a combined rate that shook the ship's superstructure. Sea Sparrow missiles burst from the VLS cells at 0.7-second intervals. In the next 18 seconds, 31 drones were destroyed. 9 broke through the defensive envelope. 6 were decoyed by the SRBO-C chaff/flare system. 2 were absorbed by the ship's AN/SLQ-32 jamming beams, their guidance chips fried by a concentrated electromagnetic pulse. 1 drone, the 9th. He punched through every layer of defense and detonated against the hull of the 3rd tanker in the column, the VLCC Atlas Mariner. The explosion tore a 4-meter gash in the tanker's port side, 2 meters above the waterline. It did not penetrate the cargo tank, but the impact ignited a fuel oil fire in the engine room. The Atlas Mariner began bleeding speed, falling behind the formation. But the drone strike was not the main attack. It was the signal. Do you believe the US Navy had any way out of the trap that was closing around them? If you think the American captain made the right call, comment yes. If you believe Iran had already won the moment those drones launched, comment no. Because what came next was a level of tactical coordination that the Pentagon had never seen from the IRGC Navy before. At 03:54 hours, 22 Ashura-class fast attack boats burst out from concealment behind a cluster of rocky islets on the Iranian coastline. They had been sitting dark and silent for 6 hours with engines off, drifting at anchor, camouflaged to blend with the radar return of the rock formations. They crossed the maritime boundary at 55 knots, spread in a precise encircling formation that had clearly been rehearsed. Each boat carried one 23mm autocannon, a shoulder-fired Masag 3 Manpads anti-aircraft system, and, most critically, two 500-kilogram limpet mine packages rigged to a magnetic attachment system. Their orders were not to sink the tankers. Their orders were to attach those mines and detonate them on a 6-minute delay. If those mines detonated against 5 fully laden crude carriers inside the Strait of Hormuz, the resulting oil release would be catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of tons of crude oil, ignited by the still-burning Atlas Mariner, would seal the strait with a wall of fire. The environmental disaster would take years to remediate. The global oil price shock would trigger immediate recession, and every news camera in the world would show American warships at the scene. Iran would not need to claim victory. The images would speak for themselves. The captain of the Paul Ignatius faced an impossible tactical calculus. Using the 5-inch gun and the ship's remaining Sea Sparrows against the fast attack boats was possible, but a near miss detonating a limpet mine payload against a laden tanker was a risk she could not accept. Using the MH-60R Seahawk helicopters with AGM-114L longbow Hellfire missiles was the correct answer. But at 03:55 hours, the IRGC executed the second layer of their trap. The Ghadir-class midget submarine that had been silent beneath the convoy for 18 hours now activated its attack sonar and fired a single heavyweight torpedo, Ghadir the destroyer. The torpedo was set on a shallow-running, arming-delayed profile and detonated in the water column 80 meters ahead of the Paul Ignatius, creating a massive cavitation column that lifted the ship's bow and slammed it back down with a concussion that knocked out the forward Phalanx CYWS fire control system and temporarily scrambled the helicopter deck crew. The MH-60R on the flight deck was grounded, its crew incapacitated for critical seconds. At the same time, the IRGC's third layer activated. The electronic warfare module mounted on the Ashura command boat, a Saman al-Emma EW platform, executed a broadband GPS denial burst at 30 kilowatts of focused jamming power, blanketing the entire strait in a 15-kilometer radius. Every guided weapon system on every American asset in the immediate area that relied on GPS navigation, including the MH-60R's navigation suite, was instantly degraded. The longbow Hellfire's millimeter wave seeker was unaffected, but the time it took the helicopter crew to recover from the torpedo concussion and get airborne was exactly the time the fast attack boats needed to reach the tanker column. At 03:58 hours, the lead Ashura boat reached the hull of the second tanker in the column. The limpet mine went on. 6-minute clock. Running. The Paul Ignatius's Combat Information Center had now identified all 3 threat vectors simultaneously: the fast attack boats, the confirmed submarine contact to the southwest, and the active jamming source. The captain transmitted a flash priority message to 5th Fleet headquarters at Jubair, Bahrain, and simultaneously to the carrier strike group centered on USS Gerald R. Ford, currently 220 kilometers southeast. The message carried one priority request: SEAL Team 6, fast rope insertion, now. The answer came from an asset the IRGC had not accounted for. 40 kilometers to the east, running dark at 12 meters altitude. The 2 MH-60M Black Hawks from a classified task unit of SEAL Team 6 had been pre-positioned on a covert holding orbit, precisely because 5th Fleet intelligence had assessed an ambush as a high probability on this transit. The crews had been running night vision, engines throttled to acoustic minimum, waiting for this exact call. They received the flash transmission at 03:59 hours and immediately pushed throttles to maximum power, covering the 40 kilometers to the convoy in under 6 minutes. While the Paul Ignatius used its remaining CIWS capacity to engage the most forward fast attack boats, destroying 3 at close range and forcing the rest into evasive dispersal, the 2 Blackhawks came in from the eastern flank at wave-top height, exploiting the same radar shadow corridor the Ashura boats had used. They came in fast, hard, and from a direction the IRGC formation was not watching. At 04:03 hours, both helicopters flared hard over the Atlas Mariner's burning superstructure. 12 SEALs fast-roped onto the hull of the second tanker, the one carrying the active limpet mine, and zero visibility, engine smoke pouring across the deck, while a combat controller on the lead helicopter used a Mark 19 grenade launcher to suppress the nearest Ashura boat, which had now turned back toward the ship after losing speed in its evasive maneuver. 4 minutes on the limpet mine clock. Running. The EOD qualified SEAL went directly for the mine package. The limpet system was an improvised derivative of a Russian MDM-6 bottom mine, modified with a commercial timer and a magnetic separation override. The SEAL identified the configuration in 8 seconds, and the manual interrupt was accessible, but the magnetic attachment had created secondary suction cups as a backup holding system. The mine could not simply be pulled free without risk of triggering the shock detonation circuit. It had to be defeated at the timer. Outside, the situation was deteriorating at speed. The Ghadir midget submarine had executed a sprint and drift maneuver and was now repositioning for a second torpedo shot, this time aimed at the hull of the Atlas Mariner, which was dead in the water and burning. The Paul Ignatius was maneuvering hard to interpose her hull between the submarine contact and the tanker, using her own displacement as a shield. The captain had transmitted weapons free authorization to her P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft, which had been holding at altitude 50 kilometers north, but it needed 90 seconds to reach firing position. 2 minutes on the clock, running. At 04:05 hours, the SEAL's gloved hands found the timer interrupt access panel and executed a controlled short circuit using a compact EMP burst tool, a device the size of a thick pen capable of generating a localized 4-joule pulse sufficient to fry a mechanical circuit without detonating the main charge. The panel opened. The timer went dark. The limpet mine was inert at 104 seconds remaining. Simultaneously, the P-8A Poseidon reached firing position and dropped an Mk-54 mod, 2 lightweight torpedo 900 meters astern of the Ghadir's last sonar contact. The blast did not destroy the submarine. It was not designed to. The hydraulic shock wave at that proximity created a violent pressure surge against the submarine's pressure hull, cracking its forward ballast tank and triggering an uncontrollable positive buoyancy event. The Ghadir surfaced involuntarily, 400 meters off the Paul Ignatius's port bow, venting compressed air through a fractured valve, exposed, disabled, and immediately surrounded. The Ashura fast attack fleet, seeing their submarine asset surface in defeat and their mine-laying operation destroyed, received a command signal from the IRGC Coastal Command Post: disengage and withdraw. In the next 4 minutes, all surviving fast attack boats turned north and accelerated toward Iranian territorial waters. At 4:11 hours, the Strait of Hormuz fell quiet for the first time since 3:47. The 5-tanker convoy resumed transit at reduced speed. The Atlas Mariner, hull breach patched by damage control teams, was taken under tow by a military salvage vessel positioned as a contingency asset 30 kilometers south. All 12 SEALs were extracted. The Ghadir midget submarine crew, 6 IRGC sailors, was taken aboard the Paul Ignatius under the law of naval warfare. 1 American sailor was killed by shrapnel during the CYWS exchange. 7 were wounded. The tankers carrying 4.2 million barrels of crude oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz and entered the Gulf of Oman at 5:44 hours, the first confirmed passage since Iran closed the waterway on day 4 of Operation Epic Fury. But the United States Navy had not won. Not cleanly, not decisively. The mine on the second tanker's hull had reached 104 seconds before it was stopped. The Atlas Mariner was crippled and leaking fuel oil into waters that would take months to remediate. The limpet mine blueprint, a commercial timer derivative that bypassed every known countermeasure, would now be replicated by every IRGC maritime unit in the Gulf. And most critically, Iran's Ghadir submarine had survived. Its crew had been captured, but its acoustic data, its patrol route, its ambush profile, all of it, had been collected by the Iranian command post before the P-8A forced it to the surface. The IRGC knew exactly how close they had come, and they would come back. The Strait of Hormuz had been forced open for one convoy. There were 1,400 kilometers of coastline, 21 Ghadir submarines, and 300 fast attack boats still under IRGC operational control. The war was 34 days old, and the sea had never been more dangerous. The U.S. has maintained the flow of oil today, but the price, measured not in barrels, but in blood and burning water, was a reminder that the oceans are now a front line. The question that every admiral in the Pentagon is asking tonight is the same one that history has always asked after a near disaster. Not whether America can win the next engagement, but whether the world can afford the cost of another one. What would you have done in the captain's position? Comment your tactical assessment below. If this breakdown exposed just how close the world came to an economic catastrophe tonight, hit the like button and subscribe.